It was a bright afternoon when Lena and her friends decided to try out the new cafe that had opened just around the corner of the busy shopping street. The place looked warm and cozy from the outside, with soft music playing and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the door. Lena pushed it open and smiled at the sight of its simple charm. There were wooden tables, little plants near the window, and a few people quietly talking or typing on laptops. It wasn't fancy, but it felt pleasant. A man behind the counter greeted them with a friendly smile. He looked to be in his late 20s, wearing a plain black apron and a name tag that simply read, David. His voice was calm and polite when he said, "Welcome. What can I get for you today?" Lena barely glanced at him, still busy chatting with her friends. One of them giggled and whispered, "He looks way too serious for someone serving coffee all day." The others laughed, and Lena joined in, not thinking much about it. When it was her turn, Lena stepped forward. "I'll have a caramel latte," she said quickly. Then with a playful smirk, she added, "You must get tired of wiping tables and making coffee all day, right?" Her tone wasn't cruel, but it carried that air of teasing arrogance that came from youth and confidence. David didn't seem offended. He smiled slightly and replied, "Not really. I like what I do." His calm response made her blink for a second. Then she shrugged it off and turned back to her friends. They found a table near the window and continued talking about their day, their plans, and the latest gossip about people they knew. Every now and then, Lena's eyes wandered toward the counter. David moved quietly, focused on his work. There was something steady and peaceful about the way he did things. But her friends kept joking about how boring his job must be, and soon she joined in again, laughing without much thought. When David brought their drinks over, he placed them gently on the table. "Here you go," he said. "Enjoy your coffee." Lena thanked him quickly, trying not to meet his eyes, feeling a small, strange twist in her chest that she couldn't explain. He smiled again, nodded politely, and went back behind the counter. For the next hour, the cafe buzzed softly with the hum of conversation and clinking cups. Lena noticed an older woman sitting near the door who kept glancing in their direction. When the woman caught Lena's eye, she gave a faint shake of her head, almost disapprovingly. Lena felt a brief flash of embarrassment but ignored it. She didn't want to admit that maybe her jokes had been a little mean. As they were getting ready to leave, Lena's friend dropped her phone, and David quickly came over to pick it up. "Here you go," he said with that same gentle tone. "Be careful, it's slippery on this floor." Her friend thanked him while Lena said, "Thanks, Mr. Helpful." It was meant to sound funny, but David just smiled politely and said, "Have a good day." His voice carried no sarcasm, no irritation, just calm kindness. Outside, the air was cooler. Lena laughed with her friends about something else, but that calm voice of his lingered in her mind. She didn't know why. Maybe because she expected him to react differently, to snap back or look annoyed, but he didn't. He had been so composed, so quietly confident. It bothered her a little that she couldn't shake the thought. A few days later, Lena passed by the same cafe on her way to work. Through the window, she saw David again, arranging pastries in the display case. The morning sun hit his face, and she noticed something different about him. He looked focused and content, not like someone who was stuck in a job as she had assumed. For a brief moment, she almost felt like walking in to say hi or maybe to apologize, but she didn't. She hurried on, telling herself it didn't matter. That night, while scrolling through social media, Lena saw a post from a friend about how people should never judge others by their jobs. It was just a random motivational quote, but for some reason it hit her differently this time. Her mind went back to the cafe, to the quiet man behind the counter who didn't seem bothered by her teasing. She sighed and kept scrolling, but that small, uncomfortable feeling grew deeper. The next weekend, her friends brought up the cafe again. "We should go there again," one of them said. The coffee was really good. Lena hesitated for a second, not sure if she wanted to face David again, but she didn't say no either. When they went back, David wasn't there that day. Another young woman was at the counter, smiling brightly. Lena felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. She told herself it was silly to even think about it. He was just a cafe worker, why should she care? Still, something about that encounter stayed with her. Maybe it was because deep down she knew she hadn't been fair. Her words hadn't been kind, and for what? To make her friends laugh? It wasn't like her to act that way, but sometimes when she was around certain people, she tried too hard to seem confident, even if it meant putting someone else down. A few more days passed and life went on as usual. Lena returned to her busy routine, meetings, late nights, trying to climb the ladder at her marketing job. She often talked about ambition and success, but in quiet moments she thought about how calm David had seemed. There was a kind of peace in him that she didn't feel in herself. He didn't care what people thought. He just did his job with quiet dignity. That thought made her both curious and uneasy. One evening, while walking home after work, Lena passed by a billboard that caught her attention. It showed a picture of a smiling man holding a cup of coffee under the words Cafe Haven, where kindness is served. The man in the picture looked familiar. She stopped and stared. It was David. The same calm expression, the same eyes. She blinked in surprise. Why was his photo on an ad? Was he the cafe's face? Or maybe an employee they featured for a campaign? She couldn't tell, but it sparked a strange curiosity inside her. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. There was something about him, something she didn't understand yet. She wondered what his real story was, who he was outside that apron. But at that moment, she had no idea just how wrong her first impression had been. Soon, she was going to find out that the man she mocked wasn't just an ordinary cafe worker. His story was far bigger, and it would leave her completely speechless when the truth came out. The week moved quickly, and Lena's schedule was packed with work meetings, calls, and endless emails. She had almost forgotten about the cafe incident until her friend Mia called one evening, excitedly saying, "Hey, there's this business event on Saturday. It's supposed to be amazing. Lots of local entrepreneurs and investors are going to be there. We should go and do some networking." Lena hesitated for a moment. She wasn't usually the type to attend such events, but she knew how important connections were in her line of work. "All right, I'll come," she said finally. It might be good for meeting people. Saturday arrived with a mix of nerves and excitement. The event was held at a large community hall that had been decorated beautifully with lights and banners. Tables were set with refreshments and a soft tune played in the background. People in suits and elegant dresses moved around, chatting and exchanging business cards. Lena felt a little out of place at first, but Mia nudged her and whispered, "Relax, just smile and look confident." That's half the job. They grabbed drinks and started mingling. A few conversations went well, but Lena's mind wandered now and then. She found herself thinking about that billboard she had seen earlier in the week, the one with David's face on it. It still puzzled her. Why would his photo be there? Was it some coincidence, or was he actually connected to the cafe in a bigger way? Her thoughts broke when the event organizer took the microphone and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome a special guest today. He's a successful entrepreneur, investor, and founder of several local businesses, including the Cafe Haven brand that's become so loved in this city. Please welcome Mr. David." Lena froze. For a split second, she thought she had misheard, but when the applause started and a man in a dark blue suit stepped onto the stage, her breath caught in her throat. It was him, the same man she had teased at the cafe, the same calm eyes and quiet smile. But now he looked completely different. Confident, elegant, and every bit the professional she had once pretended to respect. Mia leaned closer and whispered, "Oh wow, that's the guy from Cafe Haven. He owns the whole chain, can you believe that? He's so young." Lena couldn't even answer. She stood there, heart pounding, staring at him in disbelief. Every memory from that afternoon at the cafe came rushing back. The teasing, the jokes, her careless words. She had mocked him without knowing who he really was. David began to speak. His voice was calm but carried strength. "When I started my journey," he said, "I didn't have much. My first cafe was small, just a few tables, and I worked every day behind the counter. Some people used to think it was strange that I kept doing that even after expanding the business. But I never wanted to lose touch with the people who made it all possible, our customers." The crowd listened quietly. He talked about how hard it had been in the beginning, how he'd worked long nights, learned from every mistake, and built everything from scratch. "There were times," he continued, "when people looked down on me because I was just a guy serving coffee. But I realized something important. Your value isn't in your job title. It's in how you do your work and treat others while doing it." Lena's chest tightened. Every word seemed to echo inside her. She remembered his calm smile when she had mocked him. He hadn't been angry. He hadn't tried to prove anything. He had simply treated her with respect even when she didn't deserve it. As David continued speaking, the audience clapped at his words. He spoke not like someone trying to impress, but like someone who had lived through the lessons he shared. He talked about treating employees as family, about giving second chances to people who needed them, and about staying humble no matter how successful life becomes. When the speech ended, the crowd stood up and applauded. Lena clapped too, though her hands trembled slightly. She felt a mix of shame and admiration. She had misjudged him so badly. As people began to move around again, David stepped off the stage, shaking hands and talking to guests. Mia turned to Lena. Let's go meet him. I want to ask if they're hiring for marketing work. It could be a great connection. Lena panicked. No, I can't, she said quickly. You go ahead. Mia gave her a puzzled look. Why not? Lena didn't know how to explain. It's complicated, she muttered. She stood near the back, trying to blend into the crowd. But a few minutes later, she looked up and saw David walking in her direction. He was greeting everyone kindly, shaking hands and exchanging smiles. For a second, she thought he wouldn't notice her. Then his eyes met hers. Time seemed to slow. His expression didn't change much. Still calm, still polite. But there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He walked closer. Lena's heart raced. Good evening, he said with a kind smile. We've met before, haven't we? Her throat went dry. Yes, she said softly. At your cafe, he nodded, still smiling. Ah, right. I remember now. You were with your friends. Lena forced a nervous laugh. Yes, that was us. I didn't realize, he interrupted gently, that I worked there. She nodded quickly, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. He chuckled lightly. That's all right. I still do, actually. I work shifts whenever I can. You do? She asked, surprised. Yes, he said. It keeps me grounded. I like meeting people and seeing the world from their side of the counter. You learn a lot that way. Lena looked down, embarrassed. I think I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I was rude that day. I shouldn't have said what I said. David's expression softened. You don't need to apologize. People judge quickly sometimes. I've done it too, once or twice. What matters is that we learn. His words were gentle, not defensive. He didn't hold it against her. That kindness made her feel even smaller, but in a way that made her want to grow. I really admired your speech, she said sincerely. It was inspiring. You made me think a lot about how I see people. Thank you, he said. That means a lot. Before they could say more, someone called his name from across the room. He smiled at her again. It was nice seeing you. Maybe I'll see you at the cafe sometime. Lena nodded. Yeah, maybe. As he walked away, she let out a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Lena sat quietly with a cup of coffee in her hand. The room buzzed with conversation, but she wasn't listening. Her thoughts were somewhere else, back at the cafe, back to that day when she'd laughed without thinking. Now she knew who he really was. On her way out, she passed by a display near the exit showing photos of local businesses that had sponsored the event. One of them was Cafe Haven. Under David's picture were the words, "Built on kindness, served with respect." Lena stood there for a long moment, staring at those words. They were simple, but they carried so much meaning. That night, as she walked home under the quiet streetlights, she felt something shift inside her. Success, status, money, all those things she had been chasing so hard suddenly seemed a little less important. What mattered more, she realized, was how you treated people, especially those you thought were below you. She didn't know it yet, but that evening had changed something in her forever. She had seen what real success looked like, and it wasn't about titles or wealth. It was about humility, respect, and quiet strength, the kind that came from someone like David. The night after the event, Lena couldn't sleep. She kept replaying everything in her mind, David's speech, his calmness, his humility. The way he stood on that stage speaking about kindness and respect made her realize how small her own world had been. She had spent so much time chasing the idea of success, yet the man she had judged so easily had already found something much deeper and real. The next morning, she sat by her window with a cup of tea, thinking. Outside, the street buzzed with people hurrying to work, but her thoughts were somewhere else. She remembered his words clearly. Your value isn't in your job title. It's in how you do your work and treat others while doing it. It sounded simple, but it carried weight. Lena smiled faintly, shaking her head. I can't believe I teased him, she whispered to herself. What was I even thinking? The memory made her cringe. For a long time, she had been the type who judged success by appearance. Nice clothes, fancy titles, expensive cars. But seeing David that night made her realize that real success was quieter, deeper. It didn't need to be shown off. Later that week, her company held a small meeting to discuss a new marketing campaign. As they brainstormed ideas, Lena found herself suggesting something unexpected. Why don't we focus on real stories? Like people who worked their way up or those who built something from scratch, she said. Her colleagues looked at her surprised. It wasn't her usual style. She was known for flashy, attention-grabbing ideas. But this time her tone was softer, more thoughtful. Her boss smiled. That's actually not a bad idea, he said. People love genuine stories. Let's explore that. Lena nodded, but deep down she knew where the inspiration had come from. David's story had stuck with her more than she wanted to admit. That weekend she decided to visit the cafe again, not with her friends, but alone this time. She felt nervous walking through the door, unsure if he'd be there. The smell of coffee and warm pastries filled the air, and the familiar soft music played in the background. For a moment it felt like stepping into a memory. Then she saw him. David was behind the counter, wearing the same plain apron, carefully making coffee for a customer. There was something about the way he moved, steady, patient, focused. When he looked up and saw her, a small smile appeared on his face. Back again, he said kindly. How have you been? Good, she replied with a shy smile. I wasn't sure you'd remember me. I don't forget faces easily, he said, setting down a cup. What can I get you today? The same as last time, she said. Caramel latte. He nodded and began preparing it. For a moment she watched quietly, noticing how he greeted everyone with the same gentle warmth. Whether it was a teenager buying a muffin or an older man ordering tea, there was no difference in his tone or attention. He treated everyone the same. When he brought her drink over, she looked at him and said, I saw you speak at that event last week. He smiled slightly. Oh, I didn't expect to see anyone from the cafe there. I didn't expect to see you there either, she admitted, laughing softly. You really surprised me, he chuckled. In a good way, I hope. In a very good way, she said. Then after a pause, she added, I really liked what you said about work and respect. It made me think a lot. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, which surprised her a little. You know, he said, most people see what I do and think I'm just a businessman, but I don't really see it that way. The cafe business started because I needed a job and I didn't have much. I worked in restaurants, cleaned tables, washed dishes, for years. But I learned something during those times. Hard work doesn't make you small. It shapes you. She listened closely, every word sinking in. Was it hard? She asked softly. Very, he said, his voice calm but honest. There were days when I wanted to give up. I used to sleep in the back room of my first cafe because I couldn't afford rent elsewhere, but I kept going. I promised myself that if I ever succeeded, I'd never forget what it felt like to start at the bottom. That's why you still work behind the counter, isn't it? She guessed. He smiled. Exactly. It keeps me grounded. When you only sit in an office and look at numbers, you forget what real people go through. Here I get to meet everyone, students, workers, parents, dreamers. Each one has a story. Lena felt a lump form in her throat. That's really inspiring, she said quietly. I think I needed to hear that. David looked at her with kind eyes. Maybe that's why we crossed paths again, he said. Life has a way of teaching us lessons through unexpected moments. She smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in days. For a while, they just talked about small things, about the city, about dreams and how unpredictable life can be. It felt natural, human. No pretense, no titles, just two people talking honestly. When she finally stood up to leave, David handed her the coffee on the house. Next one's on me, he said. Not because you need it, but because everyone deserves a kind gesture sometimes. She laughed softly. Thank you. I'll make sure to pay it forward. Walking out of the cafe that day, Lena felt different. The world around her looked the same. Cars, people, noise, but something inside her had changed. She had started to see people differently. It wasn't about who they were on paper, but who they were and how they treated others. That night she called her mother and talked for an hour. They hadn't spoken properly in weeks. She realized she had been so caught up in her own life that she had forgotten to slow down and care. That small act of kindness from David had sparked something in her, a reminder that kindness spreads quietly, like light in a dark room. In the days that followed, Lena began to change small things in her routine. She smiled at the doorman at work and thanked the cleaning staff. She started taking lunch breaks with her junior colleagues instead of eating alone at her desk. Her co-workers noticed it too. "You've been different lately," one of them said. "Happier, calmer." Lena just smiled. "Maybe I'm just learning what really matters," she replied. One evening she sat down and wrote in her journal, a habit she hadn't touched in years. She wrote about David, about how one small moment of embarrassment had turned into something life-changing. She didn't know if she'd ever fully repay the lesson he gave her, but she wanted to live differently now, to be the kind of person who made others feel valued, not judged. Before going to bed, she looked out the window at the city lights and thought about his words again. Your value isn't in your job title, it's in how you treat others. For the first time in a long while, she felt peace. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She just needed to live with kindness the same way he did. She didn't know it yet, but her path and David's were going to cross again soon, and when it did, it would lead to something even more meaningful than she could imagine. Days turned into weeks, and Lena found herself visiting the cafe more often. It wasn't because of the coffee, though she did enjoy it. It was because of the calmness she felt there. The place had become a small escape from her noisy world. Every time she walked in, David greeted her with that same warm smile, and every conversation with him left her thinking about life in a different way. One afternoon, she arrived after work, tired from a long day of meetings. The cafe wasn't crowded, and the soft hum of quiet music filled the air. David noticed her the moment she stepped in. "Rough day?" he asked with a gentle tone as she approached the counter. "You can tell?" she said, managing a small smile. "It's in the eyes," he replied. "You look like you've been arguing with your computer all day," she laughed softly. "Pretty much. I think my laptop and I are in a love-hate relationship at this point." He chuckled as he started making her coffee. "You know, I've realized something about work. It never really gets easier, but you do learn how to stay calm through it." "That's easy for you to say," she said playfully. "You always seem calm." "Do you ever get stressed?" "All the time," he said honestly. "But stress doesn't go away by avoiding it. It goes away when you remind yourself why you started in the first place." That line stayed with her. As he handed her the cup, their eyes met for a brief second, and she felt that quiet steadiness again. The kind that came from someone who had been through enough to understand what truly mattered. They sat down at a small corner table. It had become their usual spot whenever she dropped by. She sipped her coffee slowly and asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said. "Why did you start Cafe Haven? Was it just for business?" David leaned back slightly, thinking for a moment before answering. "It started out of necessity," he said. "I needed a job and I didn't want to depend on anyone. But the idea grew. I realized that people needed a space where they could feel safe, somewhere simple but kind. That's what I wanted to build." Lena listened quietly. There was something about the way he spoke. He didn't use big words or complicated ideas, yet everything he said carried weight. He continued, "When I was younger, I worked at places where people didn't treat each other well. I promised myself that if I ever built something of my own, it would be different. I'd rather lose money than lose kindness." "That's rare," she said softly. "Most people don't think that way anymore." He smiled. "Maybe, but that's the only way I know how to live." There was a short silence. Lena looked around at the cafe, at the smiling faces, the cozy lights, and the peaceful energy that filled the room. It wasn't just a business. It felt like a small piece of someone's heart. "I wish I had your patience," she said finally. "Sometimes I get so caught up trying to prove myself at work that I forget why I even started doing it." "Then maybe it's time to remember," he said gently. "Success isn't about running faster. It's about knowing where you're going." His words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent years chasing promotions, titles, and recognition. But for what? She realized that she had never stopped to ask herself if any of it truly made her happy. They talked for almost an hour about life, goals, and mistakes. He told her about the nights he used to sleep in his first cafe, How sometimes all he had for dinner was leftover pastries. Yet he never gave up. "You can lose everything," he said. "But if you keep your will to stand up again, you haven't really lost." When it was time to leave, she stood near the door for a moment and said, "I really appreciate you sharing all this with me." He smiled. "You don't have to thank me. I've learned that sharing stories is how we all heal a little." As she walked out, she felt lighter. The world outside seemed a little softer, the noise a little quieter. A few days later, she decided to do something different. She organized a small appreciation lunch at her office for the cleaning and support staff, people she had often passed by without much notice. She thanked them personally for their work, and their smiles warmed her heart. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was doing something that truly mattered. That evening, she went back to the cafe and told David about it. "You were right," she said, smiling. "Kindness really does come back around." He laughed softly. "See, I told you. You don't need a big stage to make a difference. Sometimes a small act is enough." Their friendship grew naturally after that. They started talking about books, travel, and even the funny little things about life. There was no rush, no pretense, just genuine understanding. Lena found herself looking forward to their talks more than she wanted to admit. One rainy afternoon, the cafe was quieter than usual. Lena sat by the window watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. David brought her usual drink and sat across from her. "You know," he said, "rain always reminds me of starting over. It washes away everything and gives you a fresh start." She smiled faintly. "I could use a bit of that." He looked at her kindly. "You already started. You've changed more than you realize." She glanced down at her cup, thoughtful. "Maybe. But sometimes I still think about how badly I judged you that day. It still bothers me." He shook his head. "You don't need to keep punishing yourself for one mistake. What matters is that you learned from it. And I think you did." There was something so genuine in his tone that it eased the last bit of guilt she'd been carrying. "Can I tell you something?" she said after a pause. "I think meeting you came at the right time in my life. I was so focused on climbing up that I forgot what it meant to look around." David smiled, a quiet warmth in his eyes. Life has a funny way of teaching us what we need, even when we don't ask for it. They sat there for a long time, just talking while the rain fell softly outside. It was one of those moments that didn't need anything more. No big gestures, no perfect words, just understanding between two people who had come a long way from where they started. When the rain stopped, the evening sky turned gold. Lena stood to leave, but before walking out, she looked back and said, "You know, I used to think success was about being seen. Now I think it's about being remembered for the right reasons." David nodded. "Then you're already on the right path." She smiled and walked out, feeling at peace with herself for the first time in years. That night she lay in bed thinking about how strange life could be. How a simple trip to a cafe had turned into something that changed her entire way of seeing the world. She realized that some lessons don't come from books or work. They come from people who show you the meaning of humility through how they live. As she drifted to sleep, she made a quiet promise to herself, to be more patient, more kind, and more present. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She would never forget the man who taught her the value of respect without ever asking for it. The next morning, Lena sat by her window with a cup of coffee, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The memory of her first encounter with David still made her wince. But now it wasn't shame that filled her. It was gratitude. Life had taught her a lesson she didn't even know she needed. After her conversation with David, something inside her shifted. She began looking at people differently. The guard at her office, the cleaner who came every evening, the waiter who served her lunch. She started noticing their kindness, their effort, their quiet strength. They were all working hard in their own ways, and she realized she had once been too blind to see it. One weekend, Lena decided to visit the cafe again. She didn't tell David she was coming. She wanted to see him in his natural element, the place where he seemed most himself. The moment she stepped inside, she was welcomed by the familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. The cafe looked livelier than before. Cheerful chatter, soft music, and laughter from the staff behind the counter. David was there too, wearing the same simple apron, smiling as he served an elderly couple. His energy filled the room. He didn't act like a boss or a man of success. He acted like someone who genuinely cared about the people around him. When he noticed her, his face lit up. "You came back," he said warmly. "I told you I would," she replied with a shy smile. They talked for a while, sitting by the window where the sunlight fell softly across the table. Lena thanked him again, not just for forgiving her, but for teaching her something valuable without even trying. David shrugged lightly. "We all learn from each other," he said. "Sometimes life gives us lessons in unexpected ways." As they talked, Lena noticed how every customer greeted him with respect, not because of his success, but because of how he treated them. He remembered people's names, asked about their families, and listened with genuine interest. It wasn't the kind of behavior she was used to seeing in wealthy people. He didn't care about showing off. He cared about connecting. A young man came in, nervous and holding a folder. He was there for a job interview. David excused himself to meet him. Lena watched quietly as David spoke to him with patience and warmth. Even though the man was clearly inexperienced, David didn't make him feel small. Instead, he encouraged him, told him to believe in himself, and offered him a chance to start part-time. That small act touched Lena deeply. After the interview, David came back and she said softly, "You really are different. Most people in your position wouldn't even bother talking to someone like that." David smiled. "Everyone starts somewhere," he said. "Someone once gave me a chance too. I just try to pass it on." Later that day, as Lena walked home, she couldn't stop thinking about those words. She realized how important it was to lift others up instead of looking down on them. For years, she had believed success was about titles and image, but now she understood it was about kindness, integrity, and how you made others feel. Days turned into weeks, and Lena found herself wanting to do more. She reached out to David, asking if there were ways she could help with his foundation. He was pleasantly surprised and welcomed her idea. Soon she began volunteering with one of his programs that helped young people from struggling families find work. The experience changed her even more. She met teenagers who worked night shifts to support their parents, single mothers who learned new skills to earn a living, and young men who faced rejection after rejection, but still kept trying. Their stories humbled her. One afternoon, while organizing a small charity event, Lena stood beside David, watching the crowd fill the room. He looked calm and content, greeting everyone as if they were old friends. "You built all this," she said softly, "just by being kind." He chuckled. "Kindness doesn't build walls or businesses," he said, "but it builds trust, and trust builds everything else." Lena smiled at that. She had come a long way from the girl who once judged a man by his apron. Now she was part of something bigger than herself, something that made her feel proud in a way money or status never could. Months passed, and the cafe became one of her favorite places. It wasn't about the coffee anymore. It was about the feeling it gave her. Sometimes she would sit there quietly, watching David talk to his team or customers, and think about how life had brought her full circle. One day, she overheard two women at a nearby table whispering about David. "He's so humble," one said. "Can you believe he owns all these cafes and still works like one of the staff?" Lena smiled to herself. She wanted to turn around and tell them she once made the same mistake they were making now, judging too quickly. But she didn't. She just sipped her drink and let them discover the truth on their own. That evening, as she left the cafe, David called out, "You've changed a lot since that first day, haven't you?" Lena laughed. "I guess I needed a wake-up call." He nodded thoughtfully. "We all do sometimes. The world moves too fast, and it's easy to forget what really matters." As she walked down the street, the city lights flickered against the evening sky. She felt lighter, not because everything in her life was perfect, but because she finally understood what it meant to be human. The next day, she wrote a small note and left it on the cafe counter before David arrived. It read, "Thank you for reminding me that success isn't about what you wear or what title you hold. It's about how you treat people when no one's watching." When David found the note, he smiled. He didn't need to know who wrote it. He already did. From that day on, Lena made it a point to live differently. She treated every person, no matter who they were, with respect. She stopped comparing, stopped pretending, and started listening. And in doing so, she found a sense of peace she had never felt before. Sometimes, when she looked back on how it all began, that one careless joke in a cafe, She couldn't help but shake her head. Who would have thought that a moment of mockery would lead to one of the most important friendships of her life? Years later, she would still visit that cafe. David would still be there sometimes, still in his apron, still smiling. And every time she saw him, she would remember that one simple truth he taught her, that true success has nothing to do with titles, but everything to do with heart. And in the end, that was the real story, one she would never forget.